Welcome to my channel. This is my second video with English content. I'm hoping to increase my English content, even though most of my listeners are from Turkey or Turkish-speaking people. I believe today we will be talking about a very useful subject, especially for immigrants, Muslim immigrants, Turkish immigrants in the West, for those people who are interested in sociology of religion and sociology of immigration in general. My guest today is soon-to-be Dr. Kemal Budak. He is about to complete defense's PhD dissertation, I think in a couple of weeks, in Emory University in Georgia. Kemal Budak, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Kemal Budak. I have been in the United States for almost 15 years. I'm right now doing my dissertation. I'm doing my PhD in sociology at Emory University, and my dissertation and research areas are about immigration, religion, gender, and culture. Even though I did finish my undergrad in Turkey in translation and interpreting in Bosphorus University, I completely changed my subjects and areas, focus areas, and I did my first master's in Islamic Studies and Christian-Muslim Relations at Hartford Seminary in Hartford, Connecticut. And then I did my second master's degree in sociology at University of Houston, Clear Lake. And then I got accepted to PhD. And I'm about to, like Ms. Akarcheşme said, I'm about to finish my dissertation.
Call me Sevgi, by the way. Ms. Akarcheşme is extremely long and formal, so feel free to call me Sevgi.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you. And like Sevgi said, I am hoping to be soon to be a doctor, and I hope my research will also draw some attention, especially those who study the intersection of religion and immigration.
In general, academic subjects are considered to be boring. So today, my purpose is to make sure that you kind of simplify your research and explain why it matters. I know that, based on my research, you are especially focusing on the struggles of immigrant families and how they raise children. So because this is a everyday issue that people, struggle with, I know that most of the first generation immigrants are concerned that their kids will be assimilated. Let's start with that. What is the concern, and based on your research, what's the biggest problem between first generation immigrants and their children based on your research?
There are a couple of issues, and in the immigration literature, some of these themes are pretty much similar to each other. Immigrant families, or the first generation immigrants, and by the way, sometimes, we call them their children second generation, but some sociological literature, they prefer calling them first generation because they were born and raised in the United States. But for the sake of clarity, I just want to continue with the first generation versus second generation. And then there is even third generation. And then there is even 1.5 generation or 1.5 generation. So basically, first generation are people like us who were not born here and came here after a certain age, especially once they finish their college degree or something like that. And our children, and I have two children, both they were born in the United States. They are second generation, and most of the time, parents are concerned that, especially if they have some religious background or conservative background, they are concerned that American culture as a standalone culture is a very dominant culture. And as a result, they want to make sure they protect their children about the, again, in apostrophes, vices or the sinful nature of American culture. This is one of their utmost concern.
By the way, we are talking about in general Muslim immigrants because the majority religion here is not Islam. Muslims in the United States is such a small minority. That's why I guess your research also focuses on Muslim immigrants, right?
Yes. Yeah. As part of my research, I compared three different weekend schools, and two of them multicultural and one of them monocultural, founded by Turkish community here in the United States. So I tried to compare some sort of their trajectory of religious socialization. Instead of religious education, I prefer the term religious socialization because it's a process. It doesn't end immediately, or we don't see the end product immediately. So it takes some time to have this kind of end product to get matured or get ripened. So as a result, I think religious socialization has some actors. For example, school or weekend school or sometimes Islamic schools, they're an actor. And then families are an actor, siblings, peers, even cultural products, media is an actor. Because in my previous research, I looked at gender representation within the English language Muslim children's books. And I found very interesting, I came up with very interesting results. Maybe if we have time, we can talk later.
Such as, since we already started, you could give us an example of this Muslim children's book.
One of the most interesting thing was similar to the literature in the non-Muslim children's books, and they don't have to be Christian, by the way. There are a lot of secular children's books. The problem was in most of them inequality in representation, and male characters usually are represented more, where as the main character, or on the cover of the book, or in the title of the book. So that there are more male characters than female. Does it matter? Of course.
In comparison to English books, which are designed for general public here in the United States.
No, the thing is, even the English books, secular books, or English religious books have the same problem. They also have more male representation than female representation. For example, let's say there are 100 books on the market. In 65, 70 of them, the main character is male.
I have a toddler. She's a little over 3, so we mostly read books in English. But one of my friends sent a religious English book. Now, when I think about it, yeah, it just overlaps with your finding. The main character, Ilyas, is a boy. And I don't remember seeing a girl except for the mother.
Exactly. And there are a lot of books like that. And for example, one of the first interesting books that I came up with was Curious George. Curious George is Ramadan. There was a book like this. Oh. And, Curious George is also a male chimpanzee with a male who has a, white cone hat, etc. So there are a lot of male representation, but does it matter? Yes, because if they don't see it, they don't be it. So girls, they need to make sure they are there as a main character. The second thing that I came up with in that research was women. I looked at like more than 200 books, and at the time, like a couple of years ago, I covered almost more than 90% of the Muslim children's books on the market. So my sample was very representative. And in my sample, I found out that the women, out of let's say 200 books, only in 4 or 5 of them they are employed. Even in those 4 or 5 of them, they are mostly either blue-collar workers, or they are just selling fruit and vegetables in the market or in the bazaar, etc. So we don't see women, except for one book. We didn't see any women white-collar worker, like a doctor or an office manager or any white-collar, even a public school teacher. All public school teachers were American in those books, or Western, like British, Canadian, etc.
What does it say about the perception of Muslims then, us? Do they consider themselves, since we are Muslims, I feel free to ask this question. Do we perceive non-Muslim Western white people to be superior than us?
Maybe not superior, but in those books, I see that they have some sort of stereotypical description. Usually, I found out that illustrators and the authors, or sometimes publishers, they were playing into stereotypes. Why? Because 2/3 of the authors were Muslim, and 1/3 was non-Muslim. And I expected non-Muslim authors would be putting more female characters, the feminism and equality, etc. They didn't. Non-Muslim authors, they were putting more male characters because probably
they have their stereotypes about Muslims. Women stay home, they don't work, yes. And fathers or men are the breadwinners.
Yes, exactly. And unfortunately, women, not only they were unemployed, they were also confined to home. Most of the time, they were described as homemakers, housewives, etc. And another problem this created was sometimes they even committed some logical mistakes. For example, among the Muslim women who are hijabi or who are wearing headscarf, if they don't have any stranger at home, they don't wear it, right? Unless they pray. In some of these books, maybe in order to encourage female readers to have hijab or headscarf, The women, their mothers, they were even wearing that headscarf at home when they were cooking.
What's the impact of these books or these characterizations on the second generation kids?
You know, there's a famous, I don't know if you heard about it, but there's a famous study or survey in which American female students, or when they were asked, what do you want to be in the future? Almost none of them picked presidency or president as a profession or future goal. Why? Because they didn't have any example. So as a result, those books are, in terms of representation, they are very important. They need to see someone as a representative of their gender. I don't know if you heard about this beautiful sitcom comedy about Muslims, Little Mosque on the Prairie. You can find their episodes on YouTube by their producers. And in that Little Mosque on the Prairie, talks about a small town, Canada, where Muslims in that town have their problems, and the producers were Muslim, and they were doing in a very hilarious way. One of the main characters was a female doctor with headscarf. For example, when my daughter watched some of those episodes, it was her favorite character because she was also vocal in the community. So I think it's very important for female characters or any youth that they see themselves in a representative position. Not only that, when you talk about certain group of people within the community, again, they, for example, for their male or female children, they always come up with the same professions in the United States. Like, I want him or her to be a doctor or lawyer. Why? Because they are making the most money. But again, this is contrary to sometimes the children's request, because some of them want to be an artist, or some of them want to be a social scientist, or maybe theologian. For example, I am seeing a great danger in Muslim communities. They are not raising second generation theologians, and the average age of theologians is also increasing.
But I'm curious about problems that first generation and second generation Muslim Americans, because your research focuses on the United States. What are those? What are the challenges, biggest challenges that parents or people who are raising children come across?
In my research, I saw some similar patterns, but within the Turkish community, for example, some of those, the most obvious problem was language problem, which didn't exist in other Muslim communities. I did the research because they already took care of the English problem, because they speak English perfectly, naturally, and fluently. But within the Turkish community, first generation, most of the time, they don't speak fluent English. Even if they do, it's not fluent, and it creates some problems. With the second generation, they are very fluent, and first generation treats Turkish as a sacred language, like a holy language. In theory, they see Arabic as a sacred language, but they don't make conscious efforts towards improving their children's Arabic, for example. They just do, for example, Quran memorization, that's it. They don't even provide translations when those children memorize Quran.
But anyone who is raising kids in bilingual environments know how difficult it is to teach your native language to your child. As soon as the child is socialized, especially in a school setting, or as soon as a child starts watching cartoons in English, they immediately quit their parents' native language. I think that's a natural reaction. So it's already a challenge. There is nothing wrong in trying to teach your kids your native language, obviously. What's the reason why Turkish people tend not to speak English as opposed to other Muslims, let's say probably Arabic Americans, right? Is that what you are saying? So non-Turkish Muslims, they are more fluent in English, and they speak English with their kids, and Turkish people do not?
Turkish people, I observed, they, of course, I can't generalize. I can only talk about the group of people that I was observing who belong to the Gulen movement. But in my opinion, those people focused on Turkish more because they think that if their children lose their Turkish fluency or proficiency, they are going to lose their culture, and they are afraid that they are going to eventually lose their religion. And not only that, for example, I did interviews with like 27 parents, and one of them, for example, said, "Oh, initially I didn't even buy cereal to my child because I thought that if I would buy cereal for the breakfast instead of doing the traditional or conventional Turkish breakfast, my child would be assimilated into American culture.
Wow.
She was genuinely and sincerely thinking like this. But one day, our children went neighbor's house, and when they saw cereal, they chugged it. They were eating so passionately. I decided to buy cereal for them, and I realized that, oh, okay, my children are not being assimilated by eating cereal.
Wow,
So,
that's a very striking example, because I understand how people think that if they do not speak the native language, they will be, distanced from the culture, obviously. But I didn't realize that Turkish people see Turkishness equal to being Muslim. Is that correct?
almost. That's why I described or defined Turkish as a lingua sacra in Latin, which means the sacred language. Because some of them clearly and again genuinely believe that if their children, if they don't learn Islam in Turkish, it's not going to be true Islam that they are going to learn, they believe.
It's interesting because, the original language of Islam is Arabic. And if kids learn Islam in Arabic, that would be more authentic, I believe. But parents, maybe because they wouldn't understand, what's the reason?
Again, in the same Turkish community that I studied, the rate of Arabic speaking people were almost non-existent. But with the other weekend schools, for example, the teachers, they were always mixing Arabic and English. Some of them were American, they were born and raised in America, but their parents were from Pakistan, some Middle Eastern countries, including Syria, and a few North African. Almost the entire Muslim population.
That's because majority of the Muslim world, except for Turkey and Pakistan and some other nations, they speak Arabic. That's why it's not a challenge for them, right?
Yes, yes, and it's not a challenge for them. But even those who are from Pakistan, who mostly speak Urdu, their Arabic proficiency is much better because they, like I said, they show some conscious effort to teach Arabic to their children. There's Arabic classes. In the Turkish community, there's no Arabic class. There's Turkish class. And parents have some, you said there's nothing wrong with the parents to, teach their native language. I understand that and I agree. But the problem, in my opinion, is they have so high expectations regarding their children. They want their children, when they grew up, and when I say grew up, this is like teenager age, they expect them to read the same Turkish resources they are able to read, which is unrealistic target. Because in our daily language, we don't use academic Turkish. As a result, we are dealing with Turkish with the second generation. Half Turkish, half English. Even if they want to speak Turkish, they are not able to because there are a lot of blanks, and they don't fill these blanks with English words.
These expectations are extremely important, and I think that's the source of tension between parents and children, as far as I observe. Not only in terms of language, even non-religious Turkish people, I observe that they want their children to speak Turkish without an accent, which is impossible. How could you expect a Turkish person to speak English with an accent, for example? They are so scared of their kids losing their identity. They just want to have this loyalty to Turkey in a greater level. But when it comes to expectations, I want to ask about the religious expectations. That is also an area of contention, I believe, because especially people who are linked to Gülen movement, they are notoriously religious, right? That's one of the reasons they were persecuted and they had to immigrate to the United States. However, the second generation who are growing up to be Turkish Americans, they do not want to be as religious as they are. Maybe this is a natural outcome, whatever you call it. And I see that parents are disappointed with their children. They want to wear tattoos, they want to wear piercing, which is against the traditional, Islamic or Muslim understanding. They want their kids to be like those, or even more religious than the kids in Turkey. Now I'm just looking at the teenagers in Turkey. They are not necessarily religious, but culturally they are Muslim, and culturally, obviously, they are Turkish. But, I think you very well understand what I'm talking about. Now I want to hear, based on your research, what is the conflict when it comes to expectations of religious parents and their kids who are growing up in the United States?
That's a great question, Sevgi. I can tell you two main conflicts. One of them is cultural conflict, and the other one is theological conflict. Cultural conflict comes with language again, because when you learn a language, you also learn a culture. Let me give you another striking example from my research, and I can actually give you two of them because two similar examples happened completely in independent classes, but in the same Turkish Culture Center weekend school. So in the first one, for example, when there were like third graders in the classroom, and the Turkish teacher, who barely speak English because she was a newcomer at the time, she was about to start a new exercise, and she said, "Let's start with the boys." And when she said this, a girl said, "Ladies first." And then she didn't understand because she said it in English. And "Excuse me," she said in Turkish, and she said, "I said ladies first." And then she didn't understand again. Finally, another girl, her desk mate, and she translated saying that she wants to start with the girls. And the teacher still said, "No, let's start with the boys." Uh, Normally, in an American classroom setting, because I have a lot of experience, college and before that, you don't say let's start with the boys or girls. You don't even say let's start with the girls, because you don't give priority to any gender, race, anything. Once you do that, those who are the other group or who are in the minority, they will resist. So there's a lot of resistance by the second generation Turkish children that I observed. In another similar example, this time there were like fourth and fifth graders, and the teacher, female teacher, had a middle school assistant, and she's a native speaker, was born and raised here, and she counted the children in the classroom. There were 4 boys and 2 girls, and then she said, "Let's start with the boys." And then she said, "Because we have 4 boys and 2 girls," and she said, "Actually, we have 4 boys and 4 girls, including you and me," she said to the teacher. So even that teacher assistant, who should be supporting and helping the teacher, she resisted her prioritizing boys. And then the second one is theological resistance. Most of the literature initially was saying that children are like blank slates. Whatever you give them, they are going to absorb like a sponge. No, they don't. They have their filters. I've seen and witnessed this not in the Turkish Cultural Center weekend school, but other ones as well. In the Turkish ones, I can tell you a very interesting story, because in one class, the teacher was talking about Abraham's story and how he was, instead of sacrificing his child Ishmael, he was given this lamb. And when the teacher was telling the story, and then a lamb came, and then God said, "Slaughter this, not your son," God said. And then one child said, "Wait a minute, did the lamb come out of the sky? Did it come out of the space?" So they objected or resisted the literal interpretation, because we don't know how that lamb came in that story. Maybe it was a figurative speech. Maybe it didn't really come out of the sky, but the teacher was telling the story in a way, and the teacher couldn't answer that question. She said, "Oh, we don't know, maybe." And for example, within the same class, she was showing them a video about Abraham's whole story, but the animation quality was very low. They were only showing the desert and sand, etc. And some children said, "Hey, this doesn't show anything. We are just seeing a desert." In the next class, the teacher didn't show that animation video. Instead, she told the story in detail. So you see, children are protesting, resisting, and negotiating with their teachers. And they don't accept everything like a sponge.
Do you have any observations on teenagers? Some other challenges rise for parents when they become teenagers: dating, drinking, tattoos, piercing, you name it.
There's a great sociological study about especially this dating issue. Dr. O'Brien, his book Keeping It Halal, and he looked at those teenagers in the United States, multicultural again, North African, Middle Eastern, everybody. And he found out that there are 2 types of dating practices among the Muslim teenagers. One of them was halal dating. And in halal dating, there is no, intimate or public display of affection. They don't kiss, they don't hold hands, nothing. And they even religiously encourage each other to elevate their spirituality. This is halal dating. But with the second type of dating is dating while Muslim. So you date, but you happen to be Muslim. So this is much more, looser version. It's not as strict as the halal dating, and maybe they don't do any intimate activities, or sometimes they do, but they don't care about the community's standards. This is how he observed, and I think that that's a great observation, because parents sometimes they don't want to accept this, but again, I don't have a study right now, but I have a lot of observations during these 15 years. They date. Turkish, Bosnian, whatever, it doesn't matter. Second generation children, when they become high schoolers or teenagers, they start dating. But
Do
of
they do
course,
it secretly from their families and parents and from society?
most of the time, they are only their peers, classmates, or their closest friends know about it. Since those kids can't drive, they are not able to drive because of their age, or they don't have any cars. These datings happen virtually most of the
And
time.
social media, yeah, they live in social media anyway.
Exactly.
In any case, I'm just guessing that these tensions and challenges are inevitable for parents because of their perceptions and expectations from the second generation. To wrap up, what would be your recommendation for especially those parents, newcomers, when it comes to raising their second generation kids here to have a more harmonious and less tense relationship with their kids?
Another great question, but it doesn't have any definite answer, because each and every family dynamics are different, and each and every family's background, the level of religiosity, etc., is also different. Because what I noticed with the Turkish immigrants is their religiosity is in decline. They told me, and they said, "Yeah, I still do my 5 time daily prayers, but I don't get the same spiritual satisfaction."
Why? Why do you think? Is it because of the traumas? Because we are talking about this group which are traumatized by the regime in Turkey, and is it because they are kind of losing their religion, as the song says? Or this is a very interesting subject, so I would like to hear
Yes.
more about this.
For now, at least, I can say they are losing their religion, but they are losing some of their spiritual practices, and they
Such as, I mean, do you mean extra prayers or?
extra prayers, daily chanting that we call, dhikr, or other things. They don't do it as much as they used to, or they don't read religious books a lot. And they, even, for example, with the movement, some of them, again, I can't generalize, some of them, they don't describe themselves as the member of the movement. But again, 95% or maybe more percent of their friends are still movement members. They hang out with the same people. When they come to the Eid prayer, they use the cultural center, and if there's any marriage there, they come to the cultural center. So they continue to be in the movement with the other members, but they don't donate. Their spirituality is in decline. Their halal food practices also change. For example, at home, they still see home as a sacred place. They always consume halal meat, but outside, some of them, they don't necessarily look for halal meat. For example, Chick-fil-A restaurants is a very interesting example here, because I see Chick-fil-A restaurants as a transitional restaurant from halal to non-halal food. Because Chick-fil-A, many of my respondents, they argued that it's a Christian place because they are closed on Sunday. And, Christianity doesn't have any dietary regime like Muslims and Jews have, like kosher and halal. So they tend to see Chick-fil-A as the embodiment or symbol of that Christian dietary system. So as a result, a lot of families, they take their children to Chick-fil-A, and they see it as the Ehli Kitab or Ahlal Kitab, or people of the book, which means mostly Christians and Jews. And again, these kind of changing practices is becoming more. So as a result, those parents, they also relax their grip on their children a little bit, because they see some prior examples. I don't want to share any because this another town I observed, and I don't want to reveal any name of the city or town, but in some towns, in some big cities, teenagers, they get very good religious education during the maybe middle school and elementary school, but once they become more independent in high school and college, most of them left the movement, not only left the movement, they didn't even start praying. They stopped praying altogether. So basically, they're not losing identity, but they are preferring lose identity. It's not a firm identity.
They are two separate things. So you could be still Muslim, but not sympathizer of the Gülen movement. But I'm trying to understand, is this a trend that is seen all immigrants, Muslim immigrants? Do they become less religious over time?
Again, there is no uniform response, but most of the time, American effect or Americanization has some secularizing effect on these parents, which means they are expanding their comfort zone a little bit after a while. Because initially, they don't want to. I met a lot of people who are only going to the cultural center, their workplace, and then home. This holy triangle I was saying. That's it. They don't, or they hang out with their Turkish friends or their friends from the same ethnicity and nationality. But once they become more proficient in English, once they get better jobs, etc. For example, Turkish people have been adopting or getting a lot of IT jobs these days. They start to expand their network. And as a result, they make new Muslim friends. They make new non-Muslim friends or non-Turkish friends. So as a result, they tend to meet new people and prioritizing Muslim identity more than Turkish identity. So Turkishness is being pushed to the second place in most of these people, but Muslimness or Muslim identity is gaining importance as a overall identity.
So they would tend to describe themselves Turkish Muslim Americans, but the second generation is becoming more secular because they don't see any meaning in religion. What does your research tell?
Again, if they have intensive religious education and they are still religious, and some of these second generation children, they are pretty much religious. They continue, and one of the parents told me that, hey, my college age girl daughter, she's waking me up for tahajjud prayer, which is optional night prayer. So and she said she became my tahajjud buddy. So this is interesting. So there are also some families where within the movement, they are still religious with their children. And movement usually utilize these children as mentors and for the other kids. But the majority is not at the same religiosity level. Why? Because parents are becoming more, busier because both parents are now working. Some of them are seriously disappointed with the movement. So they just give a pause or break maybe for a while. They don't attend, for example, parents don't attend their weekly halakas or religious conversations anymore. There are a lot of parents like that. But again, some of them still attend, but here's a very interesting buzzword they use: integration. The Rumi's famous compass analogy. They want to keep one of their foot fixed in their language and religion, and with their traversing foot, they want to make sure they are learning something from other cultures. But this process is happening very slowly with the first generation, but it happens very fast with the second generation. As a result, first generation want to keep up with their children as much as possible because they think that, okay, I think I need to keep up with my child, otherwise I think I'm going to lose her or I'm going to lose him.
Almost all other immigrants, as soon as they are second or third generation, they consider themselves Americans and they just switch to English completely. But when it comes to Turks, they seem to be more resistant. Why are Turks more resistant, do you think? Do they consider themselves only American after the third generation? How does it work?
I asked this question to some children who were born and raised here. Half of them describe themselves as American, and the other half describe themselves as Turkish American. They were all born in the United States. For example, those who came here in middle or high school, some of them describe themselves as only Turkish. So basically, first generation is Turkish, second generation is mostly Turkish American or American, but starting with the third generation, Turkishness is going away. They only describe themselves as American. And some children, they don't want to associate themselves with their parents if they see some deficiency in their parents, such as not enough English fluency or their parents wearing a headscarf, but they live in a southern state where there is a lot of anti-Muslim hatred going on. So they want to keep their parents away from the public space, some of them, and they don't want to associate themselves a lot with their parents. As for your question, there's also, I find it a little bit unnecessary, but I understand. But there's a lot of national pride with the Turkish community because of its history and everything. What I notice is that, for example, those first generation parents or immigrants, unless they work in an American institution or unless they work with a lot of Americans around them, no matter how many years it passes, they don't learn English a lot. Only, survival mode. But they don't realize that their children also learning Turkish at a survival mode rate. Only daily language. They can't understand like Orhan Pamuk or Tanpınar or any other poets or authors because their Turkish is not enough. Only 1% of the parents show extreme diligence and effort to teach some literary Turkish, but we can't expect that sort of idealism from all parents. It's unrealistic again.
There's a lot of food for thought, I think, for anyone who is an immigrant in the United States.
Before I again say goodbye to everyone, normally we give a disclaimer at the beginning, but I want to give this disclaimer at the end, which is, since, like you said, Sevgi, this is a very large research, it's not easy to summarize everything. And some of the tendencies or the progress that I have been talking about is hard to generalize for all communities in the United States or for all Muslims. It was endemic or specific or particular to my own community that I observed in 3 different communities. Each and every community and nationality has their own dynamics. So it's really hard to generalize all these things. But at least people need to be mindful about these trends, in my opinion.
Exactly. So you're a social scientist, and it's like doing a puzzle with thousands of pieces, and you are only dealing with one piece, and that's your contribution, I believe. Thank you so much for your work and time, and I hope this is going to be useful for our viewers. Please do not forget to subscribe and share this video so that more people can see and watch it. Thank you so much.